Welcome to the Murray End. Before anything else, got to remind you to hit the subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe. I think it's down there if I'm in the right place. If you're listening on podcast, then hit the follow. I should also tell you I'm in an airport because I'm making my way back to London from watching some Rugby World Cup games, which is why there's an announcement for a flight to Tunisia going on behind me. But I'll try and ride my microphone so it mutes. I'm Mark Machado and I'm joined by Estelle, Nick Brookes, and my cousin Dominic, which I always feel I've got to say my cousin Dominic, so to stop people wondering if we're related, Dom. That's the only reason, because I know how Sri Lankans think. We're days away from the World Cup beginning, the men's 50 over World Cup in India. Sri Lanka have had a slightly difficult start. It was always going to be difficult because of the injuries to the bowlers. On top of all that, we lost the warm-up game to Bangladesh, if you can call it a loss. No one was really counting or paying attention to the score. But I'm sure the Bangladesh fans are very ecstatic to finally get a win in the Great Nargan Derby. And there are some more question marks over certain players. Nick, I'll start with you. What do we take away from that loss to Bangladesh?
Not a huge amount, I don't think, Marky. I've personally felt that, like, all of these warm-up games, you can't take that much from them. You're seeing sides put up huge scores, and then you look at who's batting, and they've got an opener coming in at 8, as Sri Lanka did with Dimuth coming in at 8. I don't think that really makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, I don't think you can take a huge amount from that loss, apart from the fact that maybe Sri Lanka aren't as stable and solid as we might hope they would be at this stage, but I don't think it's anything too much to worry about. And let's just look forward to South Africa on Saturday.
Estelle, what's been the kind of reaction in Sri Lanka to that so-called loss to Bangladesh?
Yeah, I mean, like Nick mentioned, it's tough to take too much or take it too seriously, or we shouldn't be taking it too seriously, particularly because we lost. But like, I felt like, and a lot of people had a few question marks as to, what the plan was. Generally, you want to see, what your team can do in those warm-ups. And I felt there were a few areas which Sri Lanka could have kind of tried things out. For example, when they got a brilliant start and Isaka looked in superb form, there was a bit of a slowdown in the middle. And then with 6 wickets down, they decided to send the Karnaratne in at 8, which I thought was a bit tricky because in a match situation, you want to see someone like maybe Velalage, we know what he can offer, right? Maybe someone like Dushan Hemanta, see what he can offer with the bat in a match situation. I think they could have done something there. Of course, I think every conversation was about Kusal Janith Pereira and him retiring hurt. It was like ominous signs, right? You see him holding on to that shoulder, which was the one that he had, I think, multiple surgeries done on. So a bit of a tricky situation. We are hearing that he's okay to go, but I feel like that may also be just kind of reassuring the fans. We don't know whether he will miss a game or not. But yeah, it's all in all, not too much to take out of that game.
Is this the last roll of the dice for KJP, Dom? If he doesn't make it through this shoulder injury, do you think we'll ever see him again in Sri Lanka colours?
Yeah, I think he's 33 now. So I would say the next ODI World Cup, certainly he's out. He has a chance. I think, we've talked about that number 4 spot in the T20 squad. If he's healthy, I could see him competing for that. But I think he knows that it's his last chance. And my hope is that he was starting to feel something in his shoulder and said, okay, in an abundance of caution, I'm just going to take it easy and retire out because this is a warm-up game. So I think this is his last run. He seems determined. I think his role is a really important one. Providing impetus at the top is going to be super, super important, especially given that we don't have Hasaranga to provide firepower down the order. So I think for me, his role for his own sort of personal career and ending it on a high note, and for the team is really, really important. So I saw some pictures, I think, from the training today. he looked like he was out there on the ground, but I'm hoping he's not diving about or rolling on that shoulder. Just let him rest and see if we can get a few games out of him.
Talking about injuries, and I was going to ask this to Estelle, but because of the unique way that news around Sri Lankan cricket is decimated or filters through, I think I'm just going to throw it out to the floor. Do we have any updates on Tikshana's injury and Hasaranga's injury? Because it seems to me like Tikshana is carrying an injury. We know that because he missed games in the Asia Cup. And Hasaranga is kind of in the shadows, may be fit at some point in the next few weeks. No one's really sure, because still it appears that nobody for SLC has actually come out and told us, the fans, what is actually going on, right?
Yeah, with Hasaranga, I think the really tricky thing, and I think what I think basically threw all of us off, was the fact that although he was supposedly ruled out of the competition, SLC did mention in their release that if he becomes fit and there's an injury in the squad, that there's a possibility that he comes back in. It's a strange one because he's re-injured his hamstring, and they say it's a grade 3 injury, which would mean a couple of weeks, I think, minimum. So I think that's where I kind of got tricky, because they mentioned in their release that if he recovers, then, and if there's someone injured, he could come in, which means there's a possibility. Tikshana, as far as I know, is still in Sri Lanka. So again, it's very, I mean, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, right? Particularly with so many other bowlers out as well.
Nick,
Yeah,
is
I
this
love that
total
SLC.
chaos? Oh,
Yeah,
go on,
it's
Nick.
total chaos for me, Marky. I love that SLC are like taking a totally off the wall approach, because I mean, we've seen with Australia and the Travis Head situation that they've said he's not going to be fit for the first half of the tournament, but he's in the squad because we want him to play later. Whereas SLTC are taking completely different tack. They've essentially said Hasaranga, when he gets fit, we'll just swap him in. And yeah, I mean, we've heard the news that Tikshana is going to arrive after the last warm up. But going into that first game with, I mean, you probably would ideally want to see Tikshana, Madhushanka, and Kumara all playing. None of them have had a lot of game time. It's got to be a worry that if someone breaks down in that first game, we could see all out chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tough to see both. Sorry, Dom.
No,
I
go
think
for it, Estelle.
it's tough to see both Madhushanka and Kumara playing, I think, together, because Sri Lanka were in a very similar situation in the T20 World Cup last year, where I think it was Kumara and Chamira, and everyone was expecting both of them to play, because obviously you'd want to play your two quickest bowlers, and then they came up with Pramod Madhushan, and the response to why both of them didn't play was because they didn't want to risk two people just coming in from injury. So I think it's a very similar situation, because like Nick said, if they both play and one of them or all three of them play and one of them breaks down in the middle of a game, we are already short of bowlers. It's going to be really tough to recover from. So probably Matisha will get that first game, and they might have to rotate the three of them.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that first game, and this is maybe looking forward a bit, is one that Sri Lanka will think that the conditions favor them. It's in Delhi, which is a slow, low-scoring track. I was looking at the scores put up. Basically, if you reach 220 and bat first, you win. So it's a slow, low track. Sri Lanka will favor themselves against South Africa, or will not favor themselves, at least back themselves. And I'd imagine you'd probably go two seamers in that situation. You'd probably maybe start with Madhushanka and say, can we get some swing early on, and have Patirana to bowl in the middle in the death overs. And then maybe save Kumara for some of the faster, more better bowling tracks. So I think there might be some horses for courses approaches here where it's a rotation, but they're thinking about, okay, how can we balance this out? The other bit is Australia, I think, which is their third match, is another slow, low pitch. So I think they'll be targeting those two matches as matches where they might go with 3 spinners and 2 seamers. So I think naturally they'll kind of work their way in. If Tikshana isn't playing, that'll be a big loss on the 7th, especially given that some of the South African batters have struggled against him in particular and are shaky starters against spin.
I'm starting to worry slightly that it might just be a case of who's fit, because if you look at the last 2 ICC events, and there've been 28 World Cups, it's kind of within about by game 3 and 4, it's kind of been which 11 is fit, right? And I just think, again, you know, I have 2 thoughts in my mind about the whole fitness thing, and that's professional cricketers exist to play cricket, right? They've got to play as much cricket as possible. That's how they make a living. That's what their job is. That's what they do, and that's what they love, and that's what we love watching them do. But also, this has happened 3 times in 3 years now, right? Somebody needs to start taking responsibility for this. They needs to. I think we've got to have a more open and honest conversation. The reality is, in Sri Lankan cricket, you don't have open and honest conversations. They happen behind closed doors, unless it might involve selection decisions, which happen in real time on social media. But I think that we need some sort of director of conditioning or something, director of fitness, someone whose job it is to make sure that when these tournaments roll around, because all right, schedules might not be fixed and venues might not be fixed, but you know roughly where in the calendar these events are turning up, that it's almost getting to the point now where it's like that we've got to have bowlers fit to play these games, right? I mean, we won an Asia Cup picking Madhush Shankar out of nowhere, basically, right? Unless they've got a few rabbits that they can pull out of the hat. If there's any more injuries, 1 or 2 more players break down, it starts to. We're really, really scraping the barrel at this point, which is a real shame because we've actually got a lot of depth in our bowling if everyone's fit. And I just want someone to put the hand up, take responsibility, and look after it. It's a shame.
Though I will say we're not the only squad that is dealing with some serious injuries at this point. We've seen with England's management of Jofra Archer, that's been very, very hard to deal with. Australia just lost Ashton Agar, and now they only have 1 spin bowler in their squad, leaving out Maxwell. And so I think, and South Africa lost Norkia and Magala just before the tournament. So I think there are some injury concerns. Tim Southey broke his thumb, so I think some of this is natural. I think the problem with SLC is what you alluded to, Mark, is the lack of, and Nick, you know, lack of information, right? We don't know what the actual status is, and we don't know when they're targeting for them to come back, right? Like, as you said, with Australia, Travis said, we're going to bring him in for the second half. Or with Jofra Archer, we have him in the traveling reserves. We don't think he's quite ready to play, but if he does become ready to play, we'll think about playing him. We kind of just have, well, someone is going to show up at some point and show up on the field, and we'll see what happens on the day of.
Nick, has it always been like this with SLC? Or was there ever a time when they were good communicators?
I don't think they've ever been good communicators. I actually, in my book, I did a story going back to the 1930s when they just made Chippy Gunasekar a captain, and then he got left out of the squad for the very next match after. So I think there's always been poor communication from SLC. I remember turning up at the SSC once before, the day before a test match was, and I said to someone, are we going to be ready? There were still people all over the outfield, and it was sort of hopefully. So I think there's always been a bit of that kind of on the fly, let's just take it as it goes mentality coming from the offices of Sri Lankan cricket. But as you guys touched on, it's great that Sri Lanka's got bowling depth at the moment, because I think if these kind of issues had happened, in days gone by, the stocks would have been bare. So it is a good sign that at least there's enough in the cupboard to pull something out. I'm still hoping maybe we might get to see Binura Fernando at the World Cup, getting bounced out of bounceless tracks. So yeah, I mean, at least there are bowlers waiting in the wings, right?
Yeah, unleash the Raga Rambo, right? That's what we're all waiting for. That ball hurtling down from about 15 feet high in the air when he's at full extension, isn't it? Smashing it down
Yes.
upon those Lucknow decks into the faces of English batters. That's what we're all looking
Mind your
forward to at
heads.
some point. Yeah, not in the malicious way, in a classy, beautiful cricketing way, of course. Is what I'm talking about. Before we came on, we were kind of talking about whether or not we do a preview to the South Africa game. It's by the sides of it, we might have to do it just minutes before they actually take the field, because that might be the only time we actually find out what the 11 is. We need to talk a little bit about Dimuth batting at 8, I guess, because do we just say that was just a way to get him some, get him on the crease and out there batting before a major tournament? None of us really think that he's going to end up batting lower than 2, do we?
No, I'd
Yeah,
be
that's
very
a funny thing,
surprised.
though. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
No, yeah, I think it was just let's give all of the batters a bit of time in the middle, and I guess maybe there are still worries about, or there were worries even prior to KJP getting injured that he was going to get injured. And I mean, I think if all of us were probably to take a punt on the 11 that's going to take the field on Saturday now, we'd probably lean towards Dimuth opening the batting with Nissanka over Kusal Pereira just because of that shoulder issue. I hope KJP is fit to take the field, but I think the likelihood is that it's going to be a Dimuth Patham opening combination.
Do you think? I think if KJP is fit and all the kind of suggestions are that it was just a precaution and he is fit, I think he's playing.
I think he's playing too. I think the first 3 games are really important. So if SL is hoping to make a deep run, I think those first 3 games are kind of utmost importance, and you can't play for the back end. You've got to try to win as many of those first 3 games up front, and then hope that the momentum carries you forward. Because I think one thing we've seen with this team, particularly under Dawson as captain, is that when they play with confidence, they play well, even when injury substitutes come in. So I think that they want to get off to as good of a start as possible.
I'm also seeing South Africa as quite a big or bust batting lineup. That they're the kind who could either put up 400 or get skittled for 150. And so, I mean, I guess that playing against that, trying to counter that, you definitely go for KJP over Dimuth in an ideal world, right?
Yeah, and I feel in recent years, Sri Lanka have kind of had the upper hand over SA, psychologically. We'll all remember that T20 World Cup game, which Sri Lanka should have got over the line. They didn't. But I think if you go back to KJP's innings in 2019, one of the greatest innings of all time, in a Test match, I think from then it kind of feels like psychologically Sri Lanka got one over SA. I could be totally wrong, and you never really know how much these things play in a player's brain. Also, we live in the IPL era. I haven't checked these stats out, but quite possibly some of the South African players might have played more cricket in India than some of the Sri Lankan players have, and might actually be more used to those decks than our players. And I wonder if, traditionally in World Cups in Asia, the Asian teams have the rubber fit. I wonder if this might be the first time when that's not as true as it once was, especially because, rightfully so, they've spread the games out across India, so the pitches are all very different and unique in themselves. It's not like playing in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka, which are now basically the only 2 places you can go to, and that every single pitch will be, or more or less every place you play will be, very friendly to spinners, right? That's why it's imperative that we sooner rather than later get an ICC tournament in Sri Lanka. I'm sure we'll do quite well in it. So Estelle, who do you think is going to open for us on Saturday?
Yeah, I think if Kusal is fit, he'll definitely play. Like Dom mentioned, those first 3 games are going to be really critical, particularly because if the track at Delhi plays as it has in the past, then that's basically kind of it levels the playing field, right? Because we've seen South Africa getting some really big scores in the recent past against Australia. They came back from, I think, 2-0 down to win that series. Lots of 300 plus scores, 350 plus scores. But when it's a track like that, that's assisting the slower bowlers, then Sri Lanka obviously have the upper hand. Opening, see the thing, and I don't know how many times you guys have discussed the selection of Dimuth. I'm sure plenty of times in the past. But I think Mavanatapattu made a really, really good point in a recent interview, saying that the extra batter in your squad needs to be a guy who can bat anywhere in that batting order. And unfortunately, the extra batter Sri Lanka have picked basically is purely an injury replacement for one man, right? It's almost as if they're expecting Kusajani to at some point not be fit. And then you have Dimuth Karunaratne coming in there to replace him. So I'm really hoping that all the positive stuff that's being said on social media, that it was just precautionary and, nothing serious, is true, because we need that really good start. And South Africa is perhaps one of the teams that Sri Lanka can really target. And if they're able to get those 3 wins against the Netherlands, Bangladesh and Afghanistan, then a team like a win against a team like South Africa could really give Sri Lanka a better chance of making it through to the semis, because that mid-table is going to be really close, I feel.
Yeah, and
guys,
also, oh, go on, Nick.
Sorry, Marky. I was just going to say, you guys all of the opinion that Sri Lanka would be better off with Avishka as the spare batter than Dimuth. Am I opening a can of worms there?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think, again, it's a fitness issue, right? Because he hasn't played in I don't know how long. So,
and he's coming back from injury too. Yeah. Go ahead, Marky.
From a 50 over perspective, I think this is slightly different for T20. From a 50 over perspective, I think we've got 2 or 3 batters there who are probably going to be in their prime in about kind of 3 to 5 years' time. I think you're looking at Kusal Mendis, Pathum, and Charith, right? And essentially, you want players around them who are kind of at this stage, I think, kind of keeping it ticking. I mean, it's really Dimuth's career is so strange, right? It's really hard to, if you were like, where does he sit in the pantheon of Sri Lankan cricketers? It's really hard to place him, right? For various different reasons, and a lot of that are, it's not his fault. He came at the era that he came in, right? But I just, to reiterate what Estelle said, it's that whole thing about, I'm not really sure what his role is within the squad. Maybe they feel it's a leadership role. That's one of those things we don't get to see, particularly, someone like myself who doesn't actually speak Sinhala. I don't really know what they're saying. I can't really tell who's saying what and who's having the, how does the dressing room dynamic work? Maybe brings a lot into that. But I think the real thing I don't really understand is there's that stat that he's played in like the last 3 World Cups, but he's only played like 48 ODIs. It's so bizarre.
And only ever played in World Cup years.
Yeah. He's like
he's a fix-it man, right? It's like when shit gets real, they're like, let's go back to Dimuth.
Yeah. When actually now, I think every time you play him, it's creating more questions than it is solving answers. If they'd picked Avishka into the warm-ups, I think actually in hindsight, when you think about it, Sri Lanka were a decent unit going into the warm-ups. So that the warm-ups, the qualifiers, they would have got through the qualifiers with or without Dimuth, even though Dimuth was exceptional in some of those games. But we potentially could have had a player who was ready to play ODI cricket, because I still think with Avishka, the biggest problems are all mental. You can see he's got the whole skill set. He just needs to have the right mentality. And he can score big runs for us. And I think, not taking him to something like this is a bit of a disaster for not just for him, but for Sri Lanka cricket the next few years.
Yeah, I also think that.
Go on, Estelle. Sorry.
I also think that 50 over cricket is Avishka's best format, in my opinion. I think he brings a lot of. He may not be the type of player, like he was completely found out in that World Cup, right? When he was pushed down to number 4. Really struggled to get things going. but yeah, but in 50 over cricket, I mean, in that last World Cup, he batted at number 3. He really caught everyone's eye with that innings against England. 50 over cricket would give him that space that he needs when he's coming after injury also to kind of settle back into international cricket, I feel. So that's one like issue. I mean, even beyond him, I think there are other players who could have been considered. Someone like Nuanindu Fernando, who did well in India early in the year, wasn't really given any extended runs in the team, and he's a guy who's batted at the top of the order and can also bat, I think, up to maybe number 5. So yeah.
I wonder if part of the consideration is they think they have 2 other or maybe 3 other guys they can move around the order. So I think maybe they're thinking Sadira can open in a pinch. So when Demuth got injured in the qualifiers, they opened with Sadira. They can obviously move DDS around because they love to do that. He can bat anywhere from 1 to 6. And then I think there's also the option, which I'm not particularly in favor of opening with Mendes if need be. So I think they have some internal flexibility, but that also makes you wonder, then why do you have Demuth? Why is Demuth the guy that you carry? So I'm not even totally sure that if KJP doesn't play, that they'll play Demuth. Or that they should play Demuth. I think one of the things we're seeing is Sri Lanka is so heavy on top order talent, 1 to 4 talent. It's hard to find guys to fit that, we have a 5 now, thankfully, with Charith, but that 6 role, that 7 role, that 8 role, how do we have people to play that role? And I think one thing that does worry me about the haphazard approach that we've kind of seen is if Sri Lanka are to do well this World Cup, they're almost going to have to do T20 matchup planning, because they don't, if South Africa scores 400 runs, that's not something we're going to be able to chase down easily. We have to be very targeted. We have to target specific bowlers with specific players. So I think what I'd like to have seen is more role definition rather than let's just try to win these games. But okay, who's going to be the person who takes advantage of the power play? Who's going to be the person who attacks spin in the middle overs? And they've done some of these things, but I think that's the disappointing thing about the preparation from the World Cup is it seems like they focused on the short term rather than how are we actually constructing a team to win one-day cricket against the best sides in the world.
A lot to think about and consider over there before we kind of wrap this up, because I am conscious that I do have a flight to catch. Not only that, but I'm also incredibly hungover. Should we kind of give some consideration to what would be a good tournament for SL? Where would they finish? What does it all mean? I mean, if they finish bottom and only win 1 match, but somehow end up finish bottom, I'm not sure if that's even possible. What would that mean? Personally, I think if they get into the top 4, I think it's been a fantastic tournament. I think if they finish 5 to 7th, depending on what the gap is between where they finish in the top 4, I think that could be considered good. I think anything below that, I think is probably not. We're not playing to the sum of our parts, and I think it's disappointing. And I'd imagine there'll be some quite big changes after that. Shall we go around Estelle, Nick, and Dom, giving us your take on it?
Yeah, I mean, semi-finals would be incredible, I think, given the injuries and how basically the tournament is structured in a way that you have to consistently play good cricket, right? I mean, if it was like a group thing, then you can sneak in, but that's not the case here. So with the tournament structure, I feel like if they make it to the semi-finals, that would be amazing. If they make it to the finals, that would be like unbelievable. But I think 5th place finish would be a realistic goal for them. 5th place, 4th to 5th, yeah, realistic one.
I think that it's really hard to predict because as I see it, India, England, and Australia look to be the best sides by quite a distance on paper, and then 4-7 should be really close. I think Sri Lanka, it's a non-negotiable that for it to be a successful tournament, they have to finish above Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and the Netherlands. But I think that actually, I think if they place anywhere between 4 and 7, but play really good cricket and are competitive throughout, then it can be seen as a tournament to build upon. Obviously, in an ideal world would be to sneak into that semi. But I think that if Sri Lanka finish 7th, but run England close, have a good game against Australia, I don't think it would be seen as an all-out disaster.
Yeah, I agree with Estelle and Nick. I think semifinal, I would say, is possible. I don't think it's impossible. I think there is, somewhere between a 15-20% chance. I think they have to play really good cricket in important matches. And I think that would be something that we would like to see, is for them to turn up against the good quality sides, to give South Africa a good game in that first match, to scare Australia on a slow pitch, right? Which they've shown they can do, to compete with Pakistan and New Zealand. So I see them again being in that 4-7 range. Best case semifinal performance, and then anything after that, we'll see what happens on the day. Disappointing would be anything below 7th, and or even 6th or 7th, but not really giving any of the teams that finish above them a scare. That's what I kind of want the next step to be, is, okay, can we beat New Zealand? Can we beat Pakistan? Can we beat South Africa? And of course, we know upsets can happen. Maybe they spring an upset on India or England or Australia. But I think playing good cricket, winning more games than they lose would be nice. So maybe 5-4 or anything better than that would be considered a success, and competitiveness. And also that tactical acumen, knowing how the game is played and not just sort of seeming completely, out of the water in an ODI World Cup.
It's all to play for, right? Interestingly, I think the 3 teams that are kind of nailed on to get through to the semis, or should get through to the semis, are India, Pakistan, and England. Don't worry, that's not my flight. I think those are the 3 big teams. I don't really rate Australia going into this. I think this just a little bit inconsistent, and don't really have a squad that I don't think could do particularly well in Australia. In India. Obviously, now I've said this, they're going to go on and win it, and that's okay. I'm a cricket fan who followed Sri Lanka through the 90s and noughties, and I've still remained a cricket fan, so I'm used to Australia winning World Cups when you least expect them to. Guys, should we wrap it up there? Because I think the French airport authorities would prefer me to end this now. But we'll be back very soon, and we should have, hopefully at some point this week, a newsletter. If you stuck with us this far, please subscribe, tell all your friends, get on board the Murali End bandwagon, because the World Cup is right around the corner, and we're all very excited about it, even though I sound like the most hungover man in the world. We'll be back soon. See you later. Bye.